Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's show. We have a special guest from over the Atlantic. A bit later on, I will introduce her in a few minutes, but as usual, I'll start with a bit of local news and family party news. There's quite a lot of it, actually, so I'll rattle through it. I had a little look at a link at some of the discussion in North Ayrshire Council when they were discussing the infamous sex survey. It was fascinating. I don't normally watch council proceedings, but this was quite an eye-opener. I mean, the first thing to note is the councillors don't seem to know their own procedures, so they're constantly breaking the rules and having to be told they're not allowed to speak or not allowed to say that or ask that person a question. Then the other thing was that the people who were objecting to the sex survey, there were a couple of councillors objecting to it, I'm glad to say, but they didn't have any arguments to put forward. All they'd got to say was, it doesn't seem right to me. How would you like it if this was asked of your daughter or whatever? But they didn't have any solid arguments to back that up. So I was a little disappointed. Anyway, that was quite interesting to have a look at. What's the SNP been up to? Well, all sorts of things. One thing in particular is apparently they're considering banning meal deals in supermarkets, or meal deals that include the wrong sort of produce, like maybe a bottle of Coke or something. I mean, can you believe it? All the issues in Scotland, and they're thinking about banning meal deals. So that's something we can look forward to in the supermarket. Now, you might have seen on social media, I put this on, Faisal Chowdhury, I think that's how you pronounce it, is a Labour MSP. And a couple of months ago, we were leafleting at a Muslim event in a park at the end of Ramadan, not actually in the event, so around it as people were leaving, and giving them the sex education leaflet. Great response. Virtually everyone said, "Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, it's really terrible, isn't it? Really glad you're standing up to this. Yeah, thanks very much for the leaflet. It was really good." And one of the people I gave a leaflet to, I thought, I recognise you. And he said who he was. It was Faisal Chowdhury, Labour MSP. So I said to him, we're alerting people to what's going on in sex education in Scotland. And he said, oh, yes, it's very concerning, isn't it? Yes, we need to change the curriculum. Yes, we certainly do. Okay. And that was that. So off I went. Next thing you know, there he is in the Parliament holding up the LGBT inclusive education placard, saying that he agrees with it all. So the LGBT inclusive education, that's why they have to teach about various types of sexual activity, have to be given equal prominence to natural sex. That's why you get transgender indoctrination from nursery all the way through primary school and high school. So there he was supporting all of that. Whereas when he's speaking to me, surrounded by his Muslim friends, you get a different picture, don't you? So I just hope Muslims are aware that, in my humble opinion, Faisal Chowdhury is not representing your opinions. It might appear to when he's with you, but when he's in the Parliament, he does completely the opposite. We had Douglas Ross there as well, supporting the LGBT inclusive education policy, which is LGBT indoctrination from nursery all through school. So that's Douglas Ross, leader of the Scottish Conservatives. Again, just a reminder for anyone who might be suffering from the conservative delusion. The conservative delusion is where people think, oh, I'm not for all that sort of thing. I vote Conservative instead. But the Conservatives are for it as well. Obviously, Boris Johnson's in the news. He's going to hang on. Nicola Sturgeon saying he should go. It's interesting how parallel the problems have been with the SNP and with the Conservatives, with Patrick Grady and with this Charles Pincher as well. Very, very similar incidents going on in the House of Commons with the SNP and with the Conservatives. With Boris Johnson's dishonesty, I mean, it was well known before he was Prime Minister, the Conservative membership made a huge mistake in electing him. But now, think about Nicola Sturgeon there. I mean, is she a sort of barefaced liar? Well, perhaps not. Perhaps he's a bit more careful than that. But we've got to remember with Nicola Sturgeon is that there is an interdict, which is the Scottish version of an injunction, which prevents reporting of aspects of her private life. So she may not be lying, but she has secrets. So there's some aspect of her life that she's keeping secret, which might well, if people were to know about it, people would think that amounted to a form of dishonesty as well. We've had 3 protests since last Tuesday, since the last live stream. Quite a busy week. We had the protest in Glasgow with Glasgow Cabby and lots of other excellent speakers outside Education Scotland's building. that was really good. We had 100, 150 maybe people there. Really good. Covered by the Daily Record. The Daily Record's report of it wasn't negative at all. It was matter of fact. It wasn't supportive, but it was neutral. It was matter of fact. But of course, needless to say, lots of speakers mentioned, but not me, not the Scottish Family Party, none of our placards in the picture. You just know that's going to happen, don't you? The media will not give us any airtime at all. But that was that. Other protests, we had our little impromptu pro-life gathering with our new pro-life flags outside the Parliament. We were only expecting about 6 people, but we ended up with about 25, I think. So that was really good as well. We will do similar things in the future. And the flags look amazing. You can see why armies used to have their flags unfurled in the breeze, because they really do look very striking. And then at about 2 hours' notice, we just put it on social media, we went along to the US consulate in Edinburgh, where there's a little pro-abortion event going on. People are objecting about Roe versus Wade. So we went there, again, with our flags. There was 4 of us there. So we listened to the speech. We heckled in the tradition of these events. Not to they had amplification, so we didn't make it so they couldn't hear the speaker. We didn't prevent their event from happening. But when the speaker was saying things like no babies are harmed in abortion and things like that, well, you just can't help but chip in the truth from time to time. It's a shame we didn't have that videoed, but there'll be other opportunities in the future for that. So that was very good. Well worth going along. So we did that very much at the last minute, with about 2 hours notice on social media. So I think it's good, though, if we can be light on our feet and get along to these things at short notice. Something else I've really been struck by this week is how many columnists, writers that I normally agree with quite a bit, that they maybe seem a bit, socially conservative. But when it comes to the pro-life issue, and they're just totally pro-abortion, they will speak and they will write, taking it for granted that everyone agrees with them. That what's happened in America with the restrictions on abortion in some states, that this is a really bad thing. What are we going to do about it? Really surprising. And the strength of their feeling is quite surprising as well. It sometimes makes me wonder, the family party, as I say, we're not, don't find the media very open to us, let's put it that way. And I wonder if this is one of the factors. Because with some media outlets, if you're, you can talk about transgender issues, you can talk about value of family life, maybe marriage. They might think you're a bit weird, but okay, it's not so bad. But if you're pro-life, maybe this is a step too far for a lot of these, I would call them culturally conservative media outlets. Right, another couple of events coming up in Edinburgh. Now, it'd be worth travelling to Edinburgh if you can to get to these. 21st of July, Matthew Grech is going to be with us, telling his story. Now, you might remember Matthew Grech was on the live stream a couple of months ago. He is the ex-gay, X Factor contestant from Malta. And he's got his story to tell, how he moved from homosexual attraction into, well, it's actually in Britain, because he's getting married 2 days after the meeting we're having, getting married to his wife-to-be, of course. So it'll be great to hear from Matthew. That is in Edinburgh. Be good to see you. And before then, next week on Tuesday night, the live stream will be a bit early, and then you'll be invited to a Zoom meeting, which is with Campaign for Bioethical Reform. They're a pro-life group. Now, there's not a family party event, and their activities on Saturday are not family party as well, but we're inviting people to go along to them and get involved, because we're happy to support and publicize events for any pro-life organization. So on Tuesday night, someone will be giving a talk and a discussion about their methods or how they promote the pro-life cause. Then on Saturday morning, there will be a training session in Edinburgh, followed by some time on the street. I'm not sure I'm supposed to say where it is, actually, so I won't say that. I don't know. In the centre of Edinburgh, in any case, they'll be going out with displays that show the developing baby in the womb at various points of gestation, and also some images of aborted babies as well. Now, what they do is they go onto the streets to educate people and alert people to the true facts about abortion, because that's completely the opposite of the sort of euphemized version that they used to in the mainstream media. So that's their tactic. And if you want to get involved with that and to help with that, then there will be the opportunity. Watch this space, and you can go along and do that. One more little snippet of news before I introduce our guest. Now, you might have seen John Mason, the SNP MSP, far and away the most outspoken MSP on controversial moral issues, I would say. I still wouldn't say he was like a firebrand. I still say he's very restrained and very moderate, but he does actually say something on these issues, which is more than every other MSP in general. So on the pro-life issue, someone wrote to him and said, what do you think about the Roe v. Wade overturning it in the United States? And he said he thought, yeah, it was basically a good thing. And he'd also said that he thinks the counselling provided before abortions in Scotland doesn't give women the information they need in order to give informed consent. And other politicians jumped on him, said he should apologise, told the SNP they should discipline him. And they always play it, whenever a public service is criticised, the government or other people, they always try and defend it by saying, you know, you're being offensive to people who work for the NHS. No, we think they do a wonderful job. You stop being so nasty to them, you horrible person. He wasn't saying that. He was just talking about the policy. And so I thought, well, you know, is that the case? I don't know. There is adequate information provided so that women can give properly informed consent. So I've written to Jason Leach, because he responded on behalf of the government saying, no, the counselling provided is adequate and it is properly informed consent. So I've written to Professor Jason Leach, and I've said to him, as far as I'm concerned, if this is going to be properly informed consent, then before the consent is given, there need to be 4 things made very clear to the woman. Number 1, adoption is an option, and there are basically people queuing up to adopt newborn babies. They're queuing up for it. Piece of information number 2, there is a possibility that abortion could lead to physical health problems. I listed a few of them. Piece of information number 3, there's a possibility the abortion could lead to mental health problems. Again, that's just a fact. It's a proven fact. And the last thing was that the woman must be made aware of the nature of abortion and different viewpoints about it. If they're just presented with like pro-abortion euphemisms, you know, we're just removing the pregnancy matter, then I think that's deceptive language and it's obscuring the true nature of what's going on. Now, some people might disagree with that, but in order for someone to give informed consent, they need to be aware of different viewpoints, especially the factual viewpoint. I mean, pregnancy matter, I mean, that's not biologically accurate by any stretch of the imagination. So I put those 4 points to him, and I've asked him to reply and say either that, yes, all those things are included in the counselling, which I know they're not, or he can explain that he doesn't think they're necessary and explain why he thinks they're not necessary. So I had a reply today saying that, you know, message received, will reply at some point. Now, I don't know what sort of reply I get. I mean, often when you email government representatives like this, it takes about 3 months. Then they reply with something, but just a bit of cut and paste that doesn't remotely answer your questions. So there's a fair chance that will happen. But whatever happens, it will be instructive to see the response. I would say I'm not writing expecting it's going to make any change. That's never why I write to the government. I write to them in order to see their response, in order to learn and to present what I've learned to other people. So that's a bit of family party news. But now we're going to move over to our very special guest this evening, who is Sharon Slater from Family Watch International. Welcome, Sharon.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me, Richard. This is very exciting.
No, a pleasure. A pleasure. I've followed Family Watch International for many years, I would say. I think it's an amazing work that you do. So many of the areas align with our policy priorities as well. Now, it's lunchtime over there. Is that right? Or are you're
Yes.
losing your lunch being with us here?
I'm happy to do it. Thank you.
We appreciate that. Do you want to tell us a bit about Family Watch International and your role in it?
I'm sure. Family Watch International has been around, I think it's 24 years now, 24 years now. And we started our work at the United Nations, and that's a key role where we play. We work to protect the institution of the family. And in order to protect family, we have to protect marriage, life, the rights of parents, and even the sovereign rights of nations, because a lot of the things against the family are being pushed from outside onto especially developing countries. We work across the world. We have Family Watch Africa. We have Family Watch in the Caribbean. And we help people in many diverse countries around the world, whether it be a member in parliament, whether it be a head of an NGO who needs help. We take a non-religious, social science-based, logical facts, medical facts, positions on all these family issues. We don't take a position that we cannot back up with all sorts of evidence, and most of that evidence would stand up in court, I would hope. I need to do a disclaimer that because I'm on your show and this is a more political show, we, as a nonprofit in the U.S., based in the U.S., cannot get involved in candidacies or political parties, but we are heavily involved in policy issues and legislation and so forth, whether it be at the United Nations, whether it be at the national, state, or local level, even down to the schools. And the last thing I would say is, for the last 10 years, the tip of our spear has actually been the protection of the health and innocence of children, because it's the children who are going to form the future families of the world. And we know that the biggest attack on the family is coming onto the hearts and minds of our children through the insidious sexuality education. So this is one of the things that we uncover in many countries and help people on the ground, religious leaders or parliamentarians, senators, whoever is willing, fight to get this out of their country.
Yeah. What's the big picture on that worldwide? I mean, is it progressing relatively unopposed, or has it been rolled back in any parts of the world, would you say?
I'd like to say that we've had a role in, pushing it back in a number of countries and even at the United Nations, because we help support the African, the Islamic countries, a few Caribbean countries. There's sometimes a few European countries that help out, and we help provide them with the information exposing the deceptive words that are used at the United Nations to promote what's called comprehensive sexuality education. And usually what we do is we take the World Health Organization definition of sexuality, because CSE, comprehensive sexuality education, is exactly that. It's comprehensive, so comprehensive, even adults would blush, education about sexuality. And the World Health Organization definition, which is used by all the UN agencies and the donor countries, sexuality encompasses all sorts of good things, but then we say like the cockroach in the ice cream. It also, and not that all these things are bad in their proper context. Some of them are bad regardless, but when we're talking about the context of children, they want to teach them sexuality includes pleasure, sexual pleasure, eroticism, desires, fantasies, sexual orientation, gender identity, mixed in with all this other wonderful things about relationships and, HIV prevention. But so whenever we're using that word sexuality in the context of sex education, which is worldwide, that's what's being pushed. And I guess to give an example, because you say where we've rolled it back, right? Because that was the original question. We rolled back this comprehensive sexuality education in Uganda. We have a documentary that exposes it. You can go to stopcse.org. The C stands for comprehensive, and then sexuality education, CSE. So stopcse.org. There's this documentary called The War on Children that we created. It exposes the whole agenda, how the United Nations is pushing this form of sexuality education on children. And that got on the Interparliamentary Network in the country of Uganda. A lot of parliamentarians saw it. And they saw that we said there's a horrible program pushed by the Netherlands in their schools called The World Starts With Me. And they didn't believe it, but they went out to the schools and they found it. I think it was in 150 schools. And they were shocked because this particular program is used in a number of countries, African, I think a few Caribbean, and it teaches children they can decide when they want to lose their virginity. I don't know. I don't want to get too graphic on the air. So there's, really graphic words and language and thoughts and things that are being pushed on the children through these programs. Anyways, they found it. They were so mad that they passed a law banning comprehensive sexuality education across the country in Uganda. Huge, huge victory. But Planned Parenthood and their allies and the UN agencies, they all got together and they put a lawsuit against this ban. And now the judge overturned the ban. Interestingly, to overturn it, she looked to documents from the United Nations to make her case, which are not binding, which are not law for Uganda. For example, she looked at things that the UN committees that are put in place to monitor treaty compliance said about what those treaties should mean. But that's a whole corrupt system where they're reading in LGBT, abortion, CSE, prostitution rights, you name it, into those treaties. And they're not binding on anybody, but the judge used those. So there's a group in Uganda that we're trying to support that's working now to overturn that. But this is kind of what happens country by country, is there's just these battles back and forth. We got it out of my state in Arizona. We had a big fight when our new superintendent came in and tried to remove in our sex education law the words that you can't teach children. I'm trying to remember what it was. It's been a while, so I don't remember the exact thing, but we got it overturned. I'm also part of the Protect Child Health Coalition in the U.S., which is all these U.S. organizations fighting comprehensive sexuality education in every state in the U.S. I mean, this is global, but when we talk about the United Nations, it took a while to help them understand how bad this agenda was and what each UN agency was pushing under the banner of comprehensive sexuality education. But we now have enough countries that even last year, the World Health Assembly, we got it overturned, a paragraph where they were proposing it. We've had multiple victories again and again at the United Nations in getting that word deleted, the whole paragraph deleted. We don't always win, but we've won a lot of those battles.
Yeah, that's great. And that's your main role, is it? Interacting with the UN.
Well, the main role we play is we actually hold a forum every year for UN diplomats. And we have many countries who regularly send their diplomats to our training, our briefings for 2 days. And they're, many of them rotate, so they are new. They know nothing about the United Nations when they come sometimes even. And so we're able to expose the deceptive words, the comprehensive sexuality education, but also the fight with gender and all the gender terms. And we could talk all day about that. Then also just even the attack on the word, the family at the United Nations. And, there's this whole slew of agendas that are being pushed day in and day out in negotiations, both at UN headquarters and in Geneva at the UN Human Rights Council. So we cover those meetings. We organize governments to speak out. We expose the problems in the documents to them. There's so many documents hitting them. And then we help them strategize and know the right language for confronting any assault on the family, whether just comprehensive sexuality education is always one. Sexual and reproductive health and rights, the euphemism for abortion and everything else that's bad, is also one that's always proposed in every document. Those are like the two main things. And then the gender language.
Yeah.
So those three things.
So the word family, you said removing the word family, or
the word family is highly controversial at the United Nations. Okay. Even though there are 5 binding treaties that most all nations have signed, where they've committed to the protection of the natural family as the fundamental unit of society. Yet that word has become so controversial. Every time it's proposed, almost every time, those who want to push the LGBT agenda add the words something to the effect of recognizing that various forms of the family exist. Well, yeah, they do exist. And, we're not trying to raise people. You also have orphan-led families. You have single mother families. You have grandparent-led families. You have all sorts of different kinds of families that aren't quite the ideal of a mother, father, child family. Those families need protection as far as food and shelter and basic human rights and everything. But everybody knows that term is a code word for LGBT families. And so there becomes a big fight. And usually, unfortunately, when it comes to this, the word "the family" often gets taken out, any reference to it. and it gets changed to families in plural, which is more inclusive at the United Nations. But I will say, several years in a row, we had some major victories. We had a great team of UN diplomats that really organized themselves at the UN Human Rights Council. And we got a series of family protection resolutions passed. One was just a general family protection. It has beautiful language, and I would encourage people to look that up. It's great, like even model policy for nations, all about the family and all the different ways the family can help solve problems, deal with the help achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Then there was one on the family and the elderly, the family and disabilities, and the important roles that the family plays. So great things are happening in many ways at the United Nations. You also have a voting bloc that came together called the Friends of the Family. In one of that's at the UN headquarters. It's called Group of Friends of the Family in the UN Human Rights Council. But they also band together to celebrate the International Day of the Family at the United Nations and start to try to push back against any encroachment on the family.
Yeah. I've got two questions really. So how is it that in your role, there's the opportunity to interact with the United Nations? What is it that enables Family Watch International to have a seat at the table, if you like? Is it because they're such a big organization, or is there something else?
Well, back in 1999, when I got invited to attend my first UN conference, I learned that if you want to operate at the United Nations and have an impact, you have to have something that's called consultative status with the Economic and Social Council. So we applied for that. It took a number of years, but we would still come to the UN and work hard with other people's badges that invited us to use them. But to get your own badge is a great thing, because then you have a right to go into the halls of the UN. You can put on sometimes events with other countries at the UN. We've done multiple times to promote certain agendas or expose bad agendas. And so we can go in there, and we're in the trenches of the battle. Sometimes we're actually inside the negotiations, where we can actually hear and then help the diplomats refute the stupid arguments that are put forward to destroy the health and innocence of children, or what have you, attacks on the family. And sometimes we can't get in the negotiations, but we're in the hallway, and we invite people who are listening. We've had people from all around the world join our teams for different UN conferences, and in the hallways, our friendly diplomats that are good friends will come out and ask for support, tell us what's going on when we can't go in. And it's a great work to be involved in. You can easily impact at the United Nations if you can just get inside.
Yeah. So what are the organizations on the other side, if you like? Which organizations are exerting a negative influence?
Oh, wow. Well, let's start with the countries that are exerting a negative influence. So I'd like you to think of and the UN agencies, because you really need to understand that and how this is all connected, right? So you have the UN agencies: UNICEF for children, UN Women for women, UNAIDS to stop AIDS, UNFPA to do with population, and so have you. Well, if you would think about these UN agencies, they're supposed to be implementing what all the countries decide. So at the top of the UN, you have the 192 plus, depending on how you count them, countries. They have all these resolutions and treaties that they make, and then the UN agencies are supposed to support it. Unfortunately, it's turned upside down. And you can put the UN agencies on top. Well, you can put the rich Western countries on top, mainly the EU, and the United States, depending on who's the president, and Canada, and Australia, and various very liberal countries. And they have captured the UN agencies. Okay, so you can think of the UN agencies as if they were NGOs of the donor countries, especially the European countries, because really they give them the money, they give them the mandates, they're totally corrupt with their agendas. They do some good in the world. I'm not negating that, but as far as the family agenda and the sexual agenda, it's all through there. Then the UN agencies bully and bribe the developing countries who are on the bottom of the rung here, and who hold them up their aid money if they don't implement sexual and reproductive health abortion policies or comprehensive sexuality education. And they're on the ground in their countries. They're manipulating. They're holding meetings. They're holding meetings like with all the ministers of education and convincing them that they need to sign agreements to implement comprehensive sexuality education. And this is a big victory we had, because they do have, like for Eastern Southern Africa, a big commitment that the UN agencies got them all to agree to. And we were able to help stop a number of countries from re-signing on for number 10 years when we show them the content, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got this kind of upside down system where it's really unfortunate that especially the families and children in the developing countries in Africa and the Caribbean and other parts of the world are really being impacted negatively because of the way the UN is. And just one more thing I have to add to that is, you said what organizations, and first I would say the UN agencies, the NGOs that are created by the donor countries are the huge problem, and they are really strategic. They create all these NGOs on the ground in all these countries, and they'll create multiple ones. And then they'll have multiple projects that they name and multiple coalitions. And then they'll come forward to push a policy that's listed all of these organizations and all these people and all this stuff and really it's just one donor country that's manipulated and paid some Africans or Ugandans or Kenyans, to organize all this on the ground. So I'm going to say the number one problem I see in the world as far as an organization, I had to get to that at last, is International Planned Parenthood Federation. International Planned Parenthood Federation has, based in the UK, has over 65,000 service points in 170 countries. And they have member associations in over, I don't know how many hundred, it's over 100 countries. So the European countries invest into the associate member organizations of IPPF. IPPF is part of everything that the UN agencies are doing and controlling the agenda. And we know that one of their number one goal, comprehensive sexuality education, is the number one tool being used by the UN agencies, International Planned Parenthood Federation, all of their affiliate membership organizations, IPIS, which is an abortion group. You've got all sorts of funded groups by, Microsoft Foundation, the Bill Gates Foundation. You've got all sorts of things funded by the McCarthy. There's all these organizations, and they all come together and work together, and they're all pushing comprehensive sexuality education because that can change the views of the children. It's designed I've studied many, many programs that the UN has published, and it walks them step by step. First, I could go through those steps if you want, but you might have other questions, but it's a very methodical way. And at the end, it basically sexualizes them too, and then turns them into sexual rights activists. So it's this very step-by-step process.
Yeah. If you want a prime example of that, we can send you what's going on in Scotland. So if you were the president, President Slater, President of the United States, what would you do with the UN? Would you withdraw from a lot of these bodies, or would you try and influence them, or use the America's funding capacity to try and pull things in the other direction? What would be the best thing?
If I were the president, is that what you said?
Yes, yeah.
Well, first of all, a lot of people attack Family Watch. Even the conservatives, they say, why are you at the United Nations? It's evil. You shouldn't go there. By going there, you're giving it some kind of, presence, right? So, but if we're not there, how are we going to get inside? How are we going to organize? How are we going to help these? I can't tell you how many delegates have said to us, almost in tears, thank you, thank you. They'd been given speeches promoting comprehensive sexuality education and sexual reproductive health education, thinking it was about really preventing AIDS or teen pregnancies or death of maternal mortality. And then they find what the true agenda is, and they're aghast and they're grateful. You have to be inside. So when the U.S. withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council, when we were under Trump, we had champions, and it was from the United States, which hadn't happened for a long time. There's a lot of power and influence that you can have. So I think if I were the president of the United States, I would not withdraw. I never even thought about that because I've always thought I would withdraw because of, but I think I would not want to be out of the discussion and using our funding to educate and expose the whole plan, everything the EU is doing, everything international, and get it stopped from within. That's what I think I would try to do.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Sometimes people say they'll join a political party to try and work on it from within. I think that's very different because in doing that, you're commending the party to people. With the United Nations, you're not endorsing the United Nations.
No. The UN Charter is a good charter. It was meant to help, prevent war. And the problem is it's been corrupted, and it's that corruption. Even the funding of, for example, the UN experts that are supposed to be assigned to human rights issues is coming from bad sources. They're funding their own people. And get a load of this. The UN expert called the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health was a former abortionist with the Sex Podcast, pushing for the, legalization of prostitution. And she's hand in hand with Planned Parenthood. It's just the whole system's corrupt.
Yeah, we're at the other end of it in Scotland. So we watch our politicians in the Parliament, and someone will come in from a campaigning organisation funded by the Scottish government and will say, "Oh, the UN representative says this," and it's like that's the final word. It's like being in a sort of evangelical Christian meeting, and instead of this is what the Bible says, this is what someone at the UN says. It's the end of the discussion. It's the end of the discussion when someone says that.
The reason why I laugh is because once I landed in I won't say which African country, but sometimes you land at the airport and they try to manipulate you. They try to make you have the yellow shot fever or whatever. And I saw this guy manipulating everybody in line and making them scared, who was from the US. And he tried it on me. He says, "Ma'am, you're going to have to pay $100 and we're going to have to give you this shot." And it's the World Health Organization has mandated that. And I said, the World Health Organization. Let me tell you about the World Health Organization. And I pulled out my book and I showed him some excerpts from their sexuality education manual for children ages 0 to 4 that says they should touch their body parts for sexual pleasure and how to masturbate, and age 9, how orgasm and this and that. This is the World Health Organization. I said, I'm not listening to you. He was like, really? He didn't bother me anymore. But I try to teach people you can't listen to these so-called expert bodies in the world today. If they're pushing that on one end, and now they're openly pushing abortion hand in hand with the EU countries and all the UN agencies, it's at the top of their list now. It seems like it used to be the LGBT, like reclassification of homosexuality and transgenderism and all that kind of stuff. But now it's abortion is really aggressive.
Yeah. Right. The two other questions about that. I find this fascinating. Now, I was speaking to someone in Iran online a few months ago, and they said the reason that things generally head in the wrong direction from our point of view at the United Nations is that the sort of progressive liberal movement throughout the world is a united worldwide movement. It said, but the social conservatives are divided into religious groups who find it more difficult to cooperate. And that's why they don't exert the influence that their numbers justify at the United Nations. Do you think that's right?
Let me just say what I think. It's, I wouldn't describe it that way, but there's some elements that I would say might be a part of that. So when I talk to U.S. audiences, I talk about the women's rights movement in the U.S. They was very big, and they were pushing the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, and they lost. And they thought, okay, now what do we do? Well, we can go to the United Nations. And you took all these radical feminists from the United States, and they started joining with all these other radical feminists and then the LGBT groups. And then they all kind of got into this. They're all started realizing that the UN is really easy to influence. And, for some of these, it's agreements, it's done on consensus. So if you can get just one diplomat, one country to disagree with something, then the whole thing gets thrown out. And if you can help people and train them up in your agenda, which is what they do, or pressure them with money, which they do, or blackmail them of taking away, they could manipulate the system really, really easily. And that's what they've been doing. And our side, I would say the side that wants to protect the family, the pro-family, pro-life side, yes, there's been an effort for a long time, but it's been minuscule, powerful, but minuscule, because most of us are at home with our families, right? Like, why do we want to go to the United Nations, and be dealing with all of this when we've got our families to take care of? So I think that we've been largely missing. You've got then also the far right, or even just the middle right, a lot, who think the United Nations is evil. And so, like they say, no, I'm not going to participate in that evil thing. I'm not going to enter in that building. And so all the evil spreads and comes back to you and all your foreign aid programs and everything else. So unless you expose it, there's a problem. So there's this whole mixture of things of how this radical sexual social agenda got embedded within the United Nations. And IPPF played a major part of that, International Planned Parenthood Federation.
Well, are the voices being raised, influence being exerted by Muslim organizations, Hindu organizations? Do you think they'd be similarly concerned
Good question.
about these issues?
Good question.
Are they not really there? Or
I have great respect for those of the Islamic faith and also of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. I will tell you that they are the ones, more than the Christian nations, that are standing up and holding up the world in these negotiations. They're fearless. Sometimes it's Russia, surprisingly, but Russia can be really, really strong. But many of the other nations are afraid to speak up, and they don't speak up, and they say nothing. But the Islamics, they really have played a role. As far as the government leaders, we would be toast where we would be at policy-wise at the United Nations without, Egypt has played a major, wonderful role. They're both in the African voting bloc and in the Islamic voting bloc. I wish we had a Christian voting bloc, or, a voting bloc that would really stand up to the world on their issues. And as far as Islamic organizations, we partnered with a few of them. There's not many that are working at the United Nations, but there are a few that are. There's one DIFI in Qatar. They are influential. They work more from the positive side of family promotion and family, building and parenting, and they're wonderful, and they play a big role at the United Nations in trying to push that.
Yep. Right. Another question. That's slightly off topic. We're very curious. Within the United Nations, in terms of the family issues, the life issue, the sexuality, education issues, it's quite clear where they stand there, and there are serious problems. Are there other areas where you think there are harmful agendas at play with the United Nations?
Yeah. Just let me say, I usually don't refer to the United Nations as just a thing, because, when we say United Nations, are we talking about the UN member states? That's every country in the world. Are we talking about the UN agencies that are all corrupt? Are we talking about, you know what I'm saying? But I get your question, but I just wanted to kind of reframe that to say some people just think the United Nations is all one thing, but it's really not. But the attack on religious freedom is huge. And that's one of the issues that we really have to deal with. There's a lot of these quasi-religious groups that have been created, and Council of World Churches that will show up at the UN or at other national meetings. That I'm not sure if that's the exact name. That might be the name, where they're promoting the whole abortion, sexuality, LGBT, everything dealing with sexuality, and saying that they represent all the religious leaders. And then the true religious leaders are left in the dust because of supposedly they've been spoken for. So there's a lot of things going on with, I'm trying to remember the initiative, but like specifically training. It's at the UN Human Rights Council, and it's a program, like a curriculum to train religious leaders that they have to respect human rights, and that they have to readjust their religious beliefs and tenets to conform with the UN's idea of human rights. And so there's this methodical outreach to religious people to try to reframe and readjust their thinking related to their religious beliefs.
Okay. First, are there any other areas where you think there's nefarious agendas?
Well, we didn't talk about gender. Gender is a huge agenda.
Yeah.
Because gender is such a deceptive word. And the word gender was defined, for example, with the International Criminal Court to mean male and female. It was also defined once at the Beijing Platform for Action when that was being negotiated as male and female. But it's clear that it's used as the Trojan horse, that definition is being ignored to get into the documents. They'll have it filled with gender words. We need gender mainstreaming. We need gender statistics, gender transformative policies, gender this. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, many of the donor countries define gender to mean, we found a list of 112 genders. I mean, there's almost anything you can imagine could be a gender. You could be pangender. You could have multiple genders inside of you. You could be agender, where you're not any gender. You could be, I can't remember all the names. Oh, abigender. I think that's the gender that can't be quantified. So one side will be thinking when the term gender is proposed that it means male and female, and that's what the other side wants them to think. And the other side fully intends to implement that whole policy to mean the whole spectrum of genders and even sexual orientation. So that's a huge problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, just before we came on air, you were telling me about an issue relating to the EU that I didn't know anything about. I was getting fascinated to hear about it. Do you want to explain about that, about the way the EU is similarly exerting pressure on particularly poorer countries?
Yes. This is the biggest secret, but the biggest threat to, I believe, life and family worldwide. It's something called the ACP EU agreement. It sounds really nice. We call it the Devious EU Treaty. In fact, we have a whole website. I would encourage you to go explore it because it is the biggest threat. You can find it at deviouseutreaty.org or just eutreaty.org. And why I say it is the biggest threat is at the United Nations, when we're fighting to protect marriage, family life, religious freedom, parental rights, the health and innocence of children, and all these things that are so important, the main way we do that is exposing the deceptive terms that they've created to bring in those agendas, the Trojan horse terms. And all those deceptive terms that we have helped diplomats understand and keep out of the documents are now in this agreement between the EU. It's called the ACP-EU agreement, EU. ACP stands for African, Caribbean, and Pacific. And so that bloc that's joining with the EU is most of all the African countries. You've got all of the Caribbean countries and all the Pacific states. And that adds up to, I can't remember, 78 or 79 countries. Then you've got all the EU countries. And if you add those all together, you have 105 or 106, depending on which EU countries you count. That is a majority of the UN member states. And they are committed in this treaty, first of all, to vote same positions, if they can, in international fora and regional fora. So this is a super voting bloc. But then it has inserted carefully within this huge economic trade agreement, which had lasted 20 years before now. They've inserted all those cockroaches, all the terms that we have problems with. They have to implement sexual and reproductive health and rights. They have to implement comprehensive sexual education, taking into account what? The UN's International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education, basically CSE. So it refers to a lot of other documents that they have to implement. It doesn't say what's in those documents, but we know what's in those documents, and it's, abortion rights, even destroying the conscious rights of doctors, prostitution rights, CSE rights, LGBT rights. I mean, this is just huge Trojan horse. If these countries all join on to this is going to go on for 20 years, 105, 100 plus 6 countries locked in to a binding treaty with the EU with all of this economic support contingent upon it, within it, okay? And it's very devious the way it's set up. I mean, I really encourage you to go to our website at eutreaty.org, where we've outlined the 12 top concerns that we have. But if you go on the About tab, you can find the actual EU treaty and do a search for sexual and reproductive health. And all these kind of things that we expose. But we invite everyone listening to be a part of helping us raise awareness. I have yet to meet one European parliamentarian, one UN diplomat. I've never met anybody, and I meet a lot of people who knew about this treaty before we told them about it. And the only way we knew about it is one of our friends from one of the African countries who we used to work with at the UN. It came across his desk, and he was responsible for it in his country in Africa. And he's like, Sharon, this is big. You've got to do something about it. This so-called agreement, and we need to get it stopped. We need people to sign our petition. We need them to raise awareness. We need them to be part of, we have an action team that you can join if we vet you and we know that you really are pro-family. We need to stop this. Our UN work will be kind of null and void if this treaty goes forward, because all the countries we get to oppose these things are locked into a treaty supporting them, right?
Yeah, yeah. The UK foreign policy is not dissimilar. UK aid is often linked to the same sort of things.
Yes. Can I tell you about something UK aid supported? You might be interested. The worst, I'm going to have to look it up to be sure, but I'm pretty sure. I'll send you a copy of it. One of the worst comprehensive sexuality education manuals that we have ever seen. It is published by the EU Commission. I think UK was on it. I think France was on it. I think Switzerland was on it. And it's called Comprehensive Sexuality Education for Youth, for out-of-school youth. And it's one of those brainwashing curriculums, but after it brainwashes kids, separates them from their kids' values through different activities, through their parents, then it tells them their values, their universal values called human rights. And a part of human rights, there's a right to health. And a part of right to health, there's a right to sexual and reproductive health. And by the way, part of the rights to sexual and reproductive health are all sorts of sexual activities and orientations. And here is a list, they call it, of sexual patterns. And the activity is they want children to pick 2 of these sexual patterns to share with each other. And this includes bestiality, pederasty, necrophilia, which is sexual pleasure with dead people. I can't remember the name for sexual pleasure with urine, sexual pleasure with feces, voyeurism, exhibitionism. I mean, this is for 10-year-olds. This is a manual, and it's got UNFPA's logo on it. It's got government, it's got the European Union. It's got Gavi on there, the immunization, and I mean, this is deplorable. This is despicable. And anybody who would even want, what purpose could you possibly have to have children have to even have those thoughts enter their mind? I mean, this is beyond the pale. And if you go to eutreaty.org and you click on and you find about I think it's there. If it's not, it's at esacommitment.org, which is a big other thing that the EU is pushing behind the scenes to get governments to commit to comprehensive sexuality education. You can find it at stopcsc.org, where you can find the War on Children. If you click on the CSE Exposed tab, you'll see a link to all the curriculum we've exposed. And you just look for Zimbabwe, and we have all of the quotes there right for you at stopcsc.org under the Curriculum Exposed tab. And you'll find many manuals. It'll tell you which UN agencies, which countries have supported them. And this agenda is so insidious. And I've spent 22, 23 plus years of my life, volunteer, full time. And this is what drives me. I cannot stand over my dead body. Will children be taught such despicable things without their parents' even knowledge and consent? This is a terrible, terrible agenda. And the heart of what we do is organize people. We expose this, we organize people, and we help them stop it wherever we can.
Yeah. In Britain, it's very popular to be expressing regret about Britain's influence on the world in the past. But I think a lot of wealthy countries need to reflect a bit more on their influence on the world in the present.
Yes, it's a huge problem.
And a lot of it does go under the radar. It's not really focused on by politicians and the media. It
They
really
don't know
takes
about it.
organizations such as your own to bring it to light.
That's true. It's a big secret. We haven't even got to Zimbabwe yet to expose it because we're working so hard already in other countries. We're working so hard to get the ACPU treaty exposed, which is the larger threat because it's going to pose all that, so we could use help. If anybody wants help, I mean, they have like their tentacles, there's 65,000 service points in 170 countries, right? But we do win often. And all we have to do to win, it's the simplest strategy. I mean, you can go to stopcse.org and you can click on our toolkit and it'll give you all the strategies and plans and tools. But you know what? All you really need is this. You grab the curriculum that's being taught to the children, you read it out loud to the legislators, you show them the page it's on, and I would say in 85%, 90% of the countries, it's going to be gone. Nobody's going to stand for it. There's a few countries, depending on the corruption of their parliaments or their senates, you could tell me what will happen with Scotland, but most countries, they're aghast. But even Scotland might even agree, in the UK, even France, if they really knew. I mean, even liberals and whatever political party you are, there comes a point where nobody wants their child sexualized, right?
Well, I think Scotland might be in the 10 or 15%. When we show elected politicians, the reaction is often just, "I don't believe you." They think we must be making it up. They don't then say, "All right, I'm going to check up. Give me the references. I'm going to get to the bottom of this." It's just, it's don't believe you. More in the sense of, that's my way of getting rid of this issue because I don't see it's helpful to me at all. So I'm just not interested.
What? I might disagree with you. I cannot tell you how many people, whether on the left or the right, that I've approached, and they really don't believe me on the left or the right. They just they don't believe. Why would anybody put that in a manual? It's just simply not true. And so when we would do these events, with the UN diplomats to prepare them for the negotiations, we'd show them all the proof. They said, "Help us show our governments. They're never going to believe this. I want to stand for the right thing, but my government's never going to let me," because that is why we created the War on Children documentary. And I plead with you to go watch it and share it, because if you have somebody says, "I don't believe it," you just say to them, would you be willing to watch this that has all the evidence? And then you can go and see for yourself all the evidence in this documentary, the page number, the title. They provide the manuals for you that you can go find. You can Google them yourself and find the manuals. I really think sometimes, I mean, they can use that as an excuse, but please go to stopcsc.org, watch the War on Children, spread it. That documentary alone has helped us stop comprehensive sexuality education. It even changed the mind of the US government's position on it. When the Trump administration came in, there were some people who were like, "No, comprehensive sexuality education is good, and we can't be against it because they had been fed the lines that it's going to solve every world problem," right? So,
in Scotland, they were well above the critical mass of politicians who do genuinely agree with the sort of comprehensive sexuality education philosophy, that they're genuinely for it.
But do they know? But I'd like to just, really challenge that, because I found sometimes they think they know and they don't, and sometimes they do know. So I always try to make sure they really, really know, because I found so many government leaders promoting it, but they've been shown good things about it and good proof that's really not proof. And so I think as a pro-life, pro-family advocate, protector of children, you always have to challenge whether they really know, which I know you guys do. I know that there's still those that are going to like it and want it, or just want to do it because that's what their political party is doing. But if you find the one that you can get to because they really didn't know, even on the left or the right or wherever they are, that's sometimes how we've won in major ways. We find the one.
Well, as I say, we've there's not a single politician in the Scottish Parliament who's spoken out on this issue. We've provided copious information to lots of. I think it's because it's so much not in their interest, and I think all the political parties are of the view that the public is also so progressively minded. They think it's a toxic issue. They think if they raise it, the media will turn on them. The other politicians will turn on them and say, you've been old-fashioned, you've been prudish, you've been Victorian, or whatever. And I think they really fear that. So the small number, I think it probably is a small number, the small number who maybe in their heart of hearts would think, wow, that's really wrong. For one reason or another, it doesn't translate into...
no one will stand for it. Isn't that sad? That's a really, really sad commentary. And, you know, you know as well as I, that's a call for the grassroots to rise up and pressure and, you know, say, we don't, you know, you're not speaking for us. We need to speak out. And I know you've done a lot of good that way already.
As a political party, our mission isn't to change the existing politicians. Our mission is to replace them. So our message to people is, you know, if this is an important issue, you've got to put it at the top of your voting priorities, and then give us a chance to bring it up.
Yes, and part of that is having the grassroots rise up and pressure them. You know, and if they still don't do it, that gives you the momentum to replace them.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that was fascinating. Apologies to people commenting. I haven't interacted with the comments at all. I was so busy educating myself about all these issues. I've learned an awful lot tonight. That was extremely interesting. There are lots of other areas we could have discussed as well. I mean, we said we'd focus quite a bit on the positive value of promoting family in terms of tackling other social issues, other issues around the world. We didn't quite get to that. But hopefully, if you're willing to sacrifice your lunch on another occasion, in a few months' time, we'd be delighted to have you back to talk about some other aspects of our Family Watch International's program.
I'd be happy to do that. I'd also invite people to go to familywatch.org and watch our webinars where I go through all the UN agencies, International Planned Parenthood Federation, all these things in detail with the evidence, like 150 slides for each one. I mean, just so much evidence. And sign up for our free newsletter at familywatch.org. And then go to eutreaty.org and be a part of helping us stop this horrible treaty. So there's lots of ways you can get. I gave you multiple websites, too many, I know, but there's too many fronts in which we need to be active promoting the family and the protection of children in life, because that's what life is all about. If we can't protect our own children, then why are we even here, right? What's the role of politicians? It's the protection of children and family and so forth. So thank you, Richard. You've been very generous with your time. I'd be happy to come back, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, but we're certainly in the same battle, just on different fronts.
Yes.
That's for sure. It's a worldwide battle that we're in. So thanks so much, Sharon, and thanks for watching. Those of you are live and later on. And see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you.